At exactly 2:17 on a bright Tuesday afternoon, I sent a message that could have ended my career, my dignity, and possibly my life as I knew it. I stared at my phone in horror as the words sat there beneath the name of the most intimidating woman I had ever met. I had meant to send the flirty message to my best friend, but somehow, my thumb had betrayed me. The message had gone straight to Seraphina Vale, the cold and untouchable CEO of the company where I worked. I expected a termination letter. I expected security to appear at my apartment. What I never expected was the sound of 3 quiet knocks on my door exactly 5 minutes later. Before we discover why the coldest woman in the city appeared at an ordinary man's door, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the possibility that one small mistake can sometimes lead to something beautiful. My name is Rowan Mercer, and until that afternoon, my life had been painfully ordinary. I was 29, worked as a junior financial analyst at Vale Meridian Group, and lived alone in a small apartment above an old bakery. I wasn't poor, but I wasn't successful either. Every month was a careful balancing act between rent, groceries, electricity, and the small amount I tried to send to my mother in another city. I had learned early that life didn't always reward good intentions. Sometimes you could work hard, keep your promises, and still find yourself standing in the same place while everyone else seemed to move forward. Seraphina Vale was the opposite of ordinary. She was 34, brilliant, wealthy, and almost impossible to read. She had built Vale Meridian from a struggling family company into one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the region. People whispered that she never smiled, never trusted anyone, and never gave second chances. Whenever she walked through the office, conversations became quieter. Employees straightened their backs. Even senior executives watched their words around her. I had worked there for 3 years and had spoken to her only a handful of times, usually about spreadsheets, reports, and deadlines. That afternoon, I was exhausted. I had spent 6 hours fixing a financial projection that my department had somehow managed to corrupt, while the sky outside was glowing with golden summer sunlight. My best friend, Kieran Holt, had been teasing me through text messages about how miserable I looked lately and suggesting that I needed a date. I had typed a playful response, intending to send it to him. I wrote that if someone could make me smile again, I might be tempted to fall hopelessly in love with her. Then, without looking at the name at the top of the screen, I pressed send. The instant the message disappeared, I noticed the name. Seraphina Vale. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen so long that the office around me seemed to disappear. There was no way to undo it. No excuse could make it less embarrassing. I imagined her reading it in her glass office on the top floor, her expression becoming colder with every word. I imagined being called into human resources. I imagined walking through the lobby carrying a cardboard box while everyone pretended not to stare. My hands became cold, and for the next 5 minutes, I waited for disaster. Nothing happened. No reply. No call. No email. I finally convinced myself that perhaps she had not seen it. Maybe her phone was on silent. Maybe she had hundreds of messages. Maybe, by some miracle, she would never notice. I left the office that evening feeling as though I had narrowly escaped execution. What I didn't know was that Seraphina had read the message twice. She had been sitting alone in her office when the notification appeared. At first, she thought it was another financial report. Then she saw my name. She opened the message and read it. For the first time in months, something unexpected crossed her face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disgust. It was sadness, followed by the faintest trace of a smile. Because the words I had accidentally sent reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, what it felt like to be wanted for who you were rather than what you owned. 5 minutes after I arrived home, there was a knock. I froze. It came again, gentle but unmistakable. I looked through the peephole and nearly stopped breathing. Seraphina Vale was standing outside my apartment. She wasn't wearing the powerful black suit she wore at the office. She had on a simple cream blouse, dark trousers, and no visible jewelry except a small silver watch. Her hair was slightly loose, and somehow that made her look less like a CEO and more like a tired woman who had spent too many years carrying something heavy alone. I opened the door. For several seconds, neither of us knew what to say. Her eyes moved briefly around my tiny apartment, taking in the second-hand sofa, the books stacked beside the window, and the old coffee maker that had survived far more years than it should have. Then she looked back at me. She told me she had received my message. My face burned. I tried to explain that it was an accident, that it was meant for Kieran, that I hadn't intended to cross a professional boundary. I apologized so many times that the words began to lose meaning. She listened without interrupting. Then she quietly told me she knew it was a mistake. That should have been the end of it. Instead, she stepped inside. She explained that she had come because something about my message had stayed with her. She admitted that people rarely spoke to her like a woman anymore. They spoke to her like a CEO, an employer, an opportunity, or a threat. She had spent years building walls because every time she had allowed someone close, they had eventually wanted something from her. I didn't know what to say. So I did something that felt more honest than any clever response. I offered her coffee. She actually smiled. It was tiny, almost invisible, but it changed the entire room. That afternoon became the beginning of something neither of us expected. Seraphina didn't suddenly become warm or cheerful. She was still demanding at work. She still expected excellence. But she began appearing in small moments outside the office. Sometimes we would cross paths at the bakery downstairs. Sometimes she would ask about my mother's health. Sometimes she would send me a message about something completely unrelated to work, and I would stare at the screen wondering how the woman who terrified an entire company had somehow become the person I looked forward to hearing from most. But just as things began to feel different, life reminded us that happiness rarely arrives without a test. One morning, my mother called to tell me that she had fallen ill and needed surgery. The cost was far beyond what I had saved. I spent the entire day trying to calculate numbers that refused to work. I considered taking a loan, selling everything I owned, and working a second job at night. I didn't tell Seraphina because I didn't want her to think our growing friendship had anything to do with money. That evening, she found me sitting alone on the steps outside the office. She didn't ask for an explanation. She simply sat beside me. Eventually, I told her the truth. I expected pity. Instead, she reminded me that accepting help didn't make someone weak. She offered assistance, but I refused at first. I told her I couldn't let her pay for my mother's treatment. She looked at me for a long moment and told me that she wasn't offering money as a CEO. She was offering it as someone who understood what it meant to be afraid of losing the person you loved. Those words broke something inside me. I finally understood that the coldness people saw in Seraphina wasn't cruelty. It was armor. Her father had died when she was 19, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a company everyone expected to collapse. Her mother had disappeared emotionally after the loss, and Seraphina had been forced to become an adult overnight. She had spent years protecting the company, her family, and herself. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten how to let anyone protect her. My mother's surgery went well. Weeks later, she called me crying with gratitude. She told me she had never seen me sound so hopeful. Neither had I. But there was one final obstacle. Rumors began spreading at the office. People noticed that Seraphina treated me differently. Some assumed I had manipulated her. Others said I was using her for money. A senior executive even suggested that my promotion had been influenced by our relationship. The rumors hurt, but what hurt more was watching Seraphina become distant again. One afternoon, she called me into her office. The sunlight poured through the windows behind her, turning the entire room gold. She told me she had decided to transfer me to another division so nobody could question my career. I thought she was ending whatever had grown between us. I told her that if protecting me meant pushing me away, then maybe she had misunderstood everything. For the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. She admitted that she was afraid. Not of the rumors, but of caring about someone enough to give them the power to hurt her. I told her that I was afraid too. Then I reminded her that fear didn't have to decide what happened next. Months passed. The transfer went through, and I continued working hard. Seraphina and I kept our relationship private while learning how to build something based on trust rather than power. There were no grand promises or perfect days. We argued. We misunderstood each other. We had moments when old fears returned. But every time one of us wanted to run, the other chose to stay. A year after the accidental message, we returned to the same bakery beneath my old apartment. The place had been renovated, but the sunlight still came through the same front windows. Seraphina sat across from me with a cup of coffee between her hands. She looked happier. Not dramatically different. Just lighter. She told me that sometimes she wondered what would have happened if I had never sent that message. I smiled and told her that I wondered the same thing. The truth was, I had spent years believing mistakes were things we had to hide. But that single mistake had shown me something I could never have learned from a perfect plan. Sometimes the door we are terrified to open is the door leading toward the life we were meant to live. And Seraphina taught me something even more important. People are rarely as cold as they appear. Sometimes they are simply carrying pain where nobody can see it. Sometimes the person who seems impossible to reach is only waiting for someone patient enough to knock without demanding anything in return. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness can change lives, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub for more emotional stories about hope, love, and second chances. And before the story ends, I want to ask you for something special. In the comments, write, "Kindness opens doors," if you believe that one act of kindness can change someone's entire life. Your comment might be exactly what another person needs to read today. Because sometimes, life doesn't change when we make the perfect choice. Sometimes it changes because we make the wrong choice, have the courage to face it, and discover that behind the door we feared opening, someone was waiting to give us a second chance.